We wanted to find out more about both of these issues, starting with how Asian Americans fit into the U.S. political landscape. I talked about that with David Leopold. He's the former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association.
Well, like any other group that's part of the fabric of this country, they have a tremendous role to play. I mean, obviously, the more participation, the better. But Asian Americans are one of the most successful immigrant groups in this country, and they ought to be making their voice heard loud and clear through the electoral process.
Just a few minutes ago, we heard a report on Hispanic immigration into the United States, and I want to talk about that as well. How has this bloc influenced American politics, would you say?
Well, this year, as you can see, the plight of the 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country is central to the campaign. It arguably is the issue this year, definitely the issue that's tearing apart the Republican Party. I think it's also important to remember that immigrants in this country undocumented immigrants are paying a tremendous amount in taxes, upwards of 11 billion per year. So they are contributing to this country in tremendous ways. And, the president has instituted or tried to institute some temporary actions, reprieves on deportation, which would increase that amount.
And I imagine some people are probably shaking their head. How can that be? How would you explain that?
Well, because people are, first of all, we have to understand that many of the undocumented, if not most, who are working are paying taxes, whether they're paying it through a Social Security number or whether they're paying it through an international tax ID number, they're paying taxes.
So explain for our viewers who live outside the United States, why is there such a debate about this? I mean, more money coming into the coffers, being available for the government. One would think people would embrace that idea, and yet, as you say, there's been quite a bit of a debate about this.
Well, people do embrace this idea. I think the studies show that upwards of 60%, higher than that, of most Americans favor immigration reform. Many Republicans, rank-and-file Republicans, believe it or not, favor immigration reform. The problem is you have a very vocal, hateful minority that are in government. You have people like Donald Trump, who is making his brand and has built his popularity on hate-mongering, particularly against immigrants, particularly against Mexican immigrants. People like Ted Cruz, who run around the country talking about how we should deport everybody. The entire Republican Party this year is for mass deportation and building walls.
I think some Republicans would argue your point. Jeb Bush would not fall into that category. And the governor in your state, John Kasich, has said you can't drive around in a car throwing people into the car and taking them out of the country. So there are some who are challenging this notion. But let me just go to what you're saying. The United States is known as a melting pot. Do you think that's changing?
No, I don't. I think what you're seeing now is an upheaval in the Republican Party, perhaps the death throes of the Republican Party. I think this country has always been strong when we talk about diversity. This country has been built by immigrants, and that's just not a cliche. You look at some of the most prominent businesses in this country, whether it's Google or whether it's other communication areas. You look into the research divisions, you look into medical research, other scientific areas. Immigrants have made this country strong. Immigrants always will make this country strong, whether they're coming from Asia, whether they're coming from Europe, whether they're coming from the Middle East, or whether they're coming from Latin America and Mexico.
David Leopold joining us from the U.S. state of Ohio. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.